By the time I pulled out of the parking garage on Peel Street, I already knew what I was going to do. I didn't feel angry anymore. That was the strange part. I just felt clear. Let me back up. I spent 31 years as an electrician. Not a glamorous job, I know. I worked for the city of Edmonton for most of my career, then ran my own small contracting business out of my garage for the last decade before I retired. I know how to read a wiring diagram, how to troubleshoot a panel that's drawing too much current, how to look at a blueprint and find the part that doesn't add up. It's not a skill people talk about at dinner parties, but it's real, and it's mine, and I built a decent life with it. My daughter, my only child, married a man named Thaddeus 4 years ago. She met him when she was working as a project coordinator at a real estate development firm in Calgary. He was the founder, 12 years older than her, very polished, the kind of man who has an answer ready before you finish your question. He wore suits that cost more than my truck. He had a way of smiling that didn't quite reach his eyes. I tried to like him. I genuinely did. When my daughter called me from Calgary to say she'd met someone, her voice had a lightness in it I hadn't heard since before her mother passed. That was 6 years ago now. The cancer. Just the two of us ever since. So when she sounded happy, I wanted to hold on to that. Thaddeus came to Edmonton to meet me about 3 months into their relationship. He took us to dinner at a restaurant downtown, one of those places where the portions are small and the lighting is dim and you feel like you're supposed to be impressed just by being there. He asked questions about my career in a way that felt like he was confirming something he'd already decided. When I told him I'd done electrical work, he nodded slowly and said, "That must have been satisfying in its way." Then he moved on to talking about his company. I noticed it. I filed it away. People say things like that without thinking. I told myself not to judge too quickly. They got married the following spring. Small ceremony near Banff, maybe 40 guests. My daughter was radiant. I walked her down the aisle on a cold April morning with the Rockies in the distance and snow still on the ground, and I thought, whatever else happens, this moment is mine and I'm keeping it. The trouble started slowly, the way it usually does. Thaddeus had a habit of changing the subject whenever I said something that contradicted him. Not aggressively. He was too smooth for that. He'd just pivot, redirect, start a new sentence like my words hadn't landed. After a while, I started noticing he did it only with me, with his own family, with his colleagues. He was perfectly capable of engaging. With me, there was always this slight bristling, this careful containment, like I was a draft he was trying to keep from blowing through his house. My daughter noticed too, I think, but she had built a life with him. They had a mortgage, a social circle, plans. She'd started to take on his way of speaking, his priorities, the things he found impressive, and the things he didn't. I didn't say anything. It's not my place. You raise your child to be your own person, and then you let her be her own person, even when it's hard to watch. Last November, Thaddeus held what he called an investor appreciation gala at a hotel ballroom in downtown Calgary. He'd been organizing it for months. His company, Broadfield Meridian Developments, had been growing fast, or that was the story being told. He'd pitched several large condo projects across Alberta and BC, had investment backers from as far as Ontario and Quebec. The gala was meant to show them the returns they were getting, celebrate the company's trajectory, and presumably get more money flowing in. My daughter invited me. She said it in a careful voice, the way people do when they're not sure if they're doing the right thing. "Dad, Thad's having this event. It would mean a lot to me if you came." I said yes without hesitating. Of course I said yes. She's my daughter. I drove down from Edmonton the day before. 8 hours there and then a night in a budget hotel near the university. I packed my good suit, the dark gray one I bought for my daughter's wedding and had worn twice since. I pressed it myself in the hotel room, the old iron clanking against the board, and I thought about how my wife used to do that before any big occasion, always meticulous, always making sure I looked decent. The gala was on a Friday evening. The ballroom was full when I arrived, maybe 200 people, maybe more. Open bar, appetizers on silver trays, a string quartet in one corner. I found my daughter near the entrance and she hugged me and told me I looked nice. Thaddeus was across the room, already in full performance mode, shaking hands, throwing his head back with laughter. He saw me and gave a small wave. Professional. Controlled. I got a glass of sparkling water and found a spot near the edge of the room where I could see everything without being in the way, an older habit from work. Always find the wall, get the lay of the space. After about 20 minutes, my daughter came to find me and brought me into a cluster of people near the main tables. Investors, she said. Some of the people her husband had been working with for years. The conversation moved the way it does at these things, around returns and projections and market timing. Someone asked what I did, or what I had done. I said I was recently retired, that I'd spent my career in the electrical trade, mostly commercial and residential work in the Edmonton area. Thaddeus had drifted over to our group by then. He heard that last part. He said, "Still going with the electrician story, eh?" He said it with a smile, the kind of smile you can't quite pin down. I didn't answer right away. I looked at him. He turned to the man standing across from us, one of the investors, a fellow from Toronto I'd been introduced to briefly. And Thaddeus said, "My father-in-law. Old school, right? 40 years running wires." He chuckled. "Every family needs one, I suppose." The Toronto man smiled politely. Someone near me made a small sound. My daughter had gone still. Thaddeus wasn't done. He was rolling now, the way he does when he senses an audience. He said, "Honestly, though, we need the tradespeople. Someone's got to keep the lights on while the rest of us try to figure out where the economy's actually going." He lifted his glass slightly, a little mock salute in my direction. Salt of the earth. The words hung there. My daughter looked at the floor. I took a sip of my water. I said, "You're right. Lights don't stay on by themselves." Then I excused myself. I found a quiet corner near the back of the ballroom, and I stood there for a while. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't rehearsing what I should have said. I was thinking. Because here's what Thaddeus didn't know about me and what I hadn't thought mattered until that evening. Before I retired, for the last 11 years of my career, I'd specialized in commercial electrical inspection. I was certified by the Electrical Safety Authority. I'd reviewed building plans, flagged code violations, worked with engineers and developers and project managers on construction sites across 2 provinces. I knew how to read a development portfolio the way other people read a newspaper. And over the past year and a half, mostly because I had time on my hands in retirement, and my daughter's name was on some of the paperwork, I had been quietly reading everything I could find about Broadfield Meridian developments. I'd noticed things. Not dramatic things, not at first. Small inconsistencies between what Thaddeus said in presentations and what the public filings showed. Square footage discrepancies in one of the Calgary projects. A contractor listed as a key builder on a Kelowna development who, when I called them, said they hadn't worked with Broadfield Meridian in over 3 years. A municipal permit in Edmonton that showed a change order so significant it effectively meant the project had changed scope entirely. And the investors, I was pretty sure, hadn't been told. I hadn't done anything with this information yet. I collected it carefully the way I used to collect evidence when I was writing up a code violation report. I put it in a folder on my computer, labeled simply, organized by project and date. My daughter's name was a minority holder in 2 of the company's registered vehicles for corporate tax purposes. She hadn't known what she'd signed when Thaddeus asked her to. She'd told me that offhandedly back when they were first getting the company restructured. That night in the ballroom, after Thaddeus made his little speech about tradespeople and keeping the lights on, I went back to my hotel room early. My daughter texted me around 10. She said she was sorry. I told her not to apologize for other people's behavior because she hadn't done anything wrong. Then I opened my laptop. I hadn't planned for it to be that night. But something about watching my daughter look at the floor. That image stayed with me. She looked the way she used to look as a kid when she'd done something she wasn't proud of. Except this time she hadn't done anything at all. That's what bothered me most. I spent the next 6 weeks being very careful. I contacted the Alberta Securities Commission through their public tip line first. I laid out what I had, clearly and methodically. I named each project. I attached my documentation. I explained in plain language where the numbers didn't line up. I did not editorialize. I did not mention the Gala, or the comments about electricians that had nothing to do with what I was submitting. I also wrote to the Real Estate Council of Alberta. 2 of Broadfield Meridian's projects involved pre-sale condo agreements, people putting down deposits on units that hadn't been built yet. If the financing wasn't what it had been represented to be, those buyers had a right to know. Then I did something I hadn't entirely planned. A business journalist in Calgary, a woman who wrote for the online edition of one of the papers there, had published a piece the previous year about fast-growing Alberta developers and the risks of undisclosed project changes. It was a well-researched piece. I found her contact through the paper's website and I sent her an email. I attached nothing. I just said I had documentation on a specific developer that I thought might be relevant to what she'd been covering and that if she was interested in having a conversation, I was available. She called me back within 48 hours. I want to be clear about something here. I didn't go to the journalist to cause problems for Thaddeus. I went because the investors at that gala, some of them were retired people. I'd seen them, men and women my own age or older, people who had worked their whole lives and were putting their savings into real estate funds, deserved to know what they'd actually bought into. That's not revenge. That's just being honest. The journalist's piece ran in February, about 2 months after the gala. She'd done her own research, verified everything independently, talked to sources I hadn't given her. The story was careful and specific. It outlined the discrepancies in project reporting, the contractor irregularities, the scope changes that hadn't been disclosed to investors. Thaddeus was named. Broadfield Meridian Developments was named. The Alberta Securities Commission confirmed they were reviewing the matter. My daughter called me the morning the piece ran. She was crying. Not angrily, which I'd half expected. She was crying because, she said, she'd started to see things in the last few months. Details in contracts that didn't match what she'd been told, and she hadn't known what to do with them. I didn't want to believe it, Dad, she said. I know, I said. Did you know what you were doing when you went to them? Yes, I said. There was a long pause. She said, you could have told me. I was trying to protect you. I said, your name is on some of this. I needed to make sure what I submitted was about the company, not about you. She was quiet for a bit after that. I want to tell you honestly that the next few months were not simple. My daughter and Thaddeus separated in March. She moved back to Edmonton temporarily, staying in her old room that I'd kept as a guest room. We ate dinner together almost every night. We talked, slowly, the way you do when there's a lot of ground to cover and you're both being careful. Broadfield Meridian entered receivership by early spring. The ASC issued a formal compliance order. 3 of the major investors filed a civil claim. A separate investigation was opened regarding the pre-sale condo agreements. Thaddeus's lawyer sent me a letter in April. I read it, noted what it said, and gave it to my own lawyer, a woman I've used for estate planning for 15 years. She reviewed it and told me I had nothing to worry about. Everything I'd submitted was factual, documented, and submitted through proper channels. I had done nothing wrong. I didn't feel triumphant when I read about the receivership. I want to be clear about that too. I felt tired mostly, and a little sad for my daughter who had loved someone for 4 years and was now having to figure out what those 4 years meant to her. What I did feel, quietly, was something like satisfaction. Not about Thaddeus, but about doing the work right. The documentation. The methodical approach. Submitting through the proper process. Not cutting corners, making sure everything was accurate before I put my name on it. That's how I was trained to work. That's how I did it my whole career. You don't sign a code report until you're sure of what you've found. One evening in April, my daughter and I were sitting on the back porch after dinner. It was still cold, mid-April in Edmonton, but there was that smell in the air that means the ground is starting to thaw. She had her hands wrapped around a mug of tea. She asked me, when did you actually start looking into it? I told her. About 1.5 years before the gala, I said, when I'd first noticed the discrepancy in the Kelowna project filings. She looked at me for a moment. So it wasn't about what he said at the gala. No, I said. The gala just told me it was time. She nodded slowly. Then she looked out at the yard. There was still some gray snow along the fence line where it takes longest to melt. "He never saw you," she said finally. "That was always his problem." I didn't answer that. I just picked up my coffee and watched the last of the afternoon light move across the fence. A man who spent 30 years working with his hands knows something about what holds things together. He knows that materials have to be honest, that you can't build on a foundation that isn't what it claims to be, no matter how polished the finishing looks on top. Sooner or later, the whole thing draws too much current, and something gives. Thaddeus built a beautiful room. He just forgot to ground the wiring. I've been thinking about that evening a lot lately. Not the ballroom, not the string quartet, not Thaddeus with his glass raised in that little mock salute. What I keep coming back to is my daughter's face. The way she looked at the floor. That half second when she went completely still. I've been an electrician for most of my adult life. That means I've spent decades learning that the thing you can't see is often the thing that matters most. The wire behind the wall. The connection inside the panel. The load that's been building quietly for years before something finally gives. You can put the most beautiful drywall in the world over shoddy work and it'll look perfect, right up until it doesn't. Thaddeus understood appearances. He was genuinely gifted at them. But he made the mistake that a lot of people make when they've gotten good at the surface of things. He stopped paying attention to what was underneath. He looked at me and saw a retired tradesman from Edmonton with a press suit and nothing useful to offer. He didn't see 31 years of reading what's actually there versus what someone wants you to think is there. He didn't see the folder on my laptop. That's what I mean when I think about how consequences work. They're rarely dramatic or sudden. They accumulate. Every misrepresented filing, every undisclosed scope change, every investor who was told one thing while the paperwork said another, those things don't disappear just because no one's looked at them yet. They sit there, patient, in the wiring of a thing, and eventually someone who knows what to look for comes along. I didn't report Thaddeus because he insulted me. I want to be honest about that, because it matters. I did it because people had put their retirement savings into his projects based on information that wasn't accurate. That's not something I could sit with. My whole career was built on the idea that when you sign your name to a report, it has to be true. Not mostly true. Not true enough. Actually true. That standard didn't stop applying when I retired. But I also think there's something worth saying about what it takes to get to that point. To do the right thing carefully. Without rushing, without letting anger make the decisions for you. It took patience. It took going back to the documentation again and again, making sure I had it right before I submitted anything. It took being willing to sit in that ballroom and say nothing. Because saying something in the moment would have felt good and accomplished nothing. The patience came from somewhere, and I think it came from the same place the work ethic did, from understanding the shortcuts or how things fail. You don't rush a wiring job because you're frustrated. You do it right or you do it again. What I hope my daughter takes from all of this, and I think she's getting there, is that integrity isn't something you perform when people are watching. It's the load-bearing wall. The thing the whole structure actually rests on, whether anyone ever sees it or not. Thaddeus built a beautiful room. He just never bothered to check whether the foundation would hold. It didn't. And the sun still came up the next morning over Edmonton, same as it always does.